with your host, Jaden Miller.
Good day. Hopefully you guys are doing well on this wonderful Sunday in September. My name is Jaden Miller, and this is Think About It with Jaden Miller. I'm going to talk about a topic today that I just kind of found out about it. But before I do, I just want to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Castbox, iHeartRadio, Audrey, Podvine, and on Amazon Podcast. I'm sure that there are several that I did not mention that I'm on as well. You can check me out at my website at www.jadenmiller.com, JAYDENMILLER.com. All right, thanks again for joining me. Puerto Rico is in a total blackout as Hurricane Fiona bears down on the island nation. Puerto Rico is without power as the United States territory grapples with the threat of flooding and mudslides stemming from the Category 1 storm. So I just want to send out a message to the people of Puerto Rico to hang in there. My gosh, that's got to be terrifying. Ukrainian forces seize control of a river near Kharkiv after Russian retreat. You know, the Ukrainians are really fighting hard against Russia. And I have a sneaking suspicion that at some point in the very near future, Russia is going to say, you know what, enough is enough. But I just have to say that I admire the Ukrainian forces for stepping up and fighting back against, Russia. It just goes to show that just because you're a Goliath does not mean that David can't whoop your little booty or your big booty. So shout out to the Ukrainian forces for hanging in there. I was reading a story today about rusty water dripping from ceilings and cockroaches infesting classrooms and schools facing atrocious conditions. Why is it that here in the United States of America, our schools take a back seat to other things that just don't seem to be as important? I think, and I've always thought that it's ridiculous that teachers get paid little. Schools, the funding for schools is minimal. I think that is just ridiculous, in that here in the United States, we just have our priorities backwards. We should be really doing what we can to educate our next generations, but somehow or another, we find money for other things, but don't find money for the things that really, truly matter. There are two tsunami warnings issued after a 6.9 magnitude earthquake in Taiwan. Storms are still lashing Alaskan shore, bringing severe coastal flooding and prompting evacuations. And so much stuff going on in the world. My goodness. Today I want to talk to you about a gentleman that I found out about. His name is Philip Yancey, and he's a best-selling author. Philip Yancey talks about his life and how he grew up in a strict fundamentalist church in the South, and that he tended to view God as a scowling super cop, searching for anyone who might be having a good time in order to squash them. He talks about, or he jokes about, being in recovery from a toxic church. Let me read to you a quote. He says, of course, there were good qualities, too, in his church from back when he was a younger person. He's 71 years old, so we're going back to the 60s. He said if a neighbor's house burned down, the congregation would rally around and show charity, if, that is, the house belonged to a white person. He says that he grew up confused by contradictions. He heard about love and grace, but didn't experience much. And he says that he was taught that God answers prayers miraculously, but his father died of polio just after his first birthday, despite many prayers for his healing. For Yancey, reading offered a window to a different world for him. So he devoured books that opened his mind, challenged his upbringing, and went against what he had been taught as a young kid. A sense of betrayal engulfed him. Yancey says that he felt he had been lied to. For instance, what he learned from a book like To Kill a Mockingbird or Black Like Me contradicted the racism he encountered in the church. He went through a period of reacting against everything he was taught and even discarding his faith. He began his journey back by mainly encountering a world very different than he had been taught, an expansive world of beauty and goodness. And along the way, he realized that God had been misrepresented by himself. And he says that he returned circling around the faith to see if it might be true. I did a little bit of just research on Philip Yancey because his history really intrigued me. And, I'm just going to share a little bit about his experience in the church as a youth and how he kind of came out of that. He says that the summer before his junior year in high school, he attended a 4th of July rally that featured some of the most dangerous racists in America. It was 1964, according to Philip Yancey, and the event, billed as Patriots Rally Against Tyranny, was held at a racetrack in Yancey's hometown of Atlanta. It featured a Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard along segregationists such as Governors George Wallace of Alabama and Ross Barnett of Mississippi. So as Philip Yancey sat in the bleachers with about 11,000 cheering white Southerners waving miniature Confederate flags, he heard speakers denounce the same enemies he learned about in his fundamentalist church, where the pastor lampooned Martin Lucifer Coon and preached that coloreds were inferior because of the curse of Ham. But something took place at the rally that made Yancey question what he had been taught. He noticed a group of black men sitting in the stands. Just before Governor Wallace spoke, 3 of them began to boo. That was the cue for a group of Klansmen to rise up from their seats and attack the men. Other whites joined them, punching the black men in their faces and hitting them with folded chairs as the men frantically tried to escape. The crowd began chanting, "Hit 'em, kill 'em." Yancey says, I reacted first as part of the cheering mob. Who were these black guys trying to crash our party? Yet, when the white men started beating them with fists and even chairs, according to Yancey, he felt sick at his stomach. He says that he left the rally with a bitter taste in his mouth, the taste of shame. For years, he did not talk about that experience. According to Yancey, there's been a lot of debate in recent years about the rise of white Christian nationalism and white evangelicals' steadfast support for former President Trump. But few people are better equipped than Yancey to explain how racism infiltrates white churches and how one can escape it. Yancey went from being a self-described born and bred racist to becoming one of the most popular authors and speakers in contemporary America. His books have sold an estimated 17 million copies and been translated into 50 languages. Several, such as What's So Amazing About Grace and Where Is God When It Hurts, have become contemporary Christian classics. The anecdote about the white supremacist rally marks one of Yancey's most candid admissions of his youthful embrace of racism. It comes from his recently released memoir, Where the Light Fell. In this book, Yancey recounts how racism corrupted his faith and eventually led him to feel betrayed by the church. He rejected the racism of his youth, though, after encountering a series of remarkable people during his years as a journalist and an author. He wanted to tell a story about what it takes to change the calloused conscience of someone who was raised to view blacks and other people as inferior. Yancey says that I have a shelf full of best-selling books chronicling the black experience and exhorting us to become anti-racist. I look in vain, however, for one that explores the mind of a bigot and what it might take to change that mind. I found that Yancey was very, very deep in his philosophy, and certainly, sharing with us his experiences. He as I read about him and learn a whole lot about him, I'm just amazed at what he went through as a child, and during the tumultuous civil rights movement back in the 1960s, how at that time he was able to make this transition from being a born and bred racist, based simply on one incident he saw as a youth, that would get him to change. It begs to question, for example, if I could ask him a question, why do you think you were able to change when so many other people who were born and bred to be racist never evolved? And as I read about him, in answering that question, he mentions that he was a reader. And he says that when he read this book called Black Like Me, and for those of you that aren't aware of the book, it was a 1961 nonfiction book about a white man who darkened his skin and traveled through the segregated South. But when he read Black Like Me, that was a turning point because it just didn't make sense to Yancey. Here's the exact same person who artificially changed the color of his skin, and at one point he's treated like a gentleman and has access to anywhere he wants to go. And then suddenly, because he changes the color of his skin, he's treated like a dirty animal and people spit on him. He has to step off the sidewalk. He can't use the restroom, can't get a drink of water. He's the exact same person. It was a moral splinter that Yancey says would stick inside his head and bother him. Isn't that something? When Yancey is further questioned about his youth, he recalls that black people gave him someone to look down on. And when he says that, he's also talking about the people from his church. He says, what the problem is today, and he just is real specific, and he says the core is just racism. He goes on to say that he's been to 87 countries, and he found that kind of instinct, one where you look down upon someone else, in many different countries. He says that when he first went to Norway, they started telling jokes about the Swedes. They were the same jokes that he says we told, meaning white people, about blacks growing up. He says that he went to New Zealand and they're telling the same jokes about the indigenous Maori people. Or he says then you go to Africa, like in Rwanda, where they have exactly the same color of skin, and one group starts killing the other group because they're a little different. And there's something about that fear of the other that he says we have got to overcome. Yancey says that as a Christian, the fear just stands out to him. He says Jesus talked about the Good Samaritan, not the good Jew. He says the very first missionary in the book of Acts was a castrated black man, the Ethiopian eunuch. He says that the apostle Paul was raised to be a Jew of all Jews, but he eventually said that in Christ there is no Jew or Gentile. There's something bigger than race, according to Yancey. And so I had a really good opportunity to check him out and read about him, and I would encourage you all to do so as well. He goes on and kind of relates to what's happening in white evangelical churches today. He says that, he wonders why there's this subculture of the thoughtful mainstream evangelical. And he goes on to talk about that he loves being in a room with those people, and he wishes that's what people thought of when they thought of evangelicals, meaning people that, go out and speak, about God and that kind of thing. He says that those good people, those good evangelicals, that he doesn't think that they've disappeared, but what's happened is the spotlight has turned away from those people, and has become a political filter. He says people only want to judge evangelicals by politics. Growing up, we weren't political, according to Yancey. He says fundamentalists would never aspire to political office. And now the word evangelical almost implies right-wing politics to most people. And he thinks that that's very dangerous. He goes on to talk about nowadays, if you ask people who check evangelical in a box, in a poll, a lot of them can't even name 2 of the 4 gospels. He says it's become a label that to them means I don't like abortion. I don't like the way the country is going to transgender or gay people, so I must be an evangelical. It used to be a theological category, according to Yancey. He says that it's not now. It's become a slogan for I don't like some things going on in my country and I'm kind of angry about them. That's a quote from Yancey. And he says that Trump brilliantly tapped in, we're talking about President Trump, that President Trump brilliantly tapped into that anger. But Yancey says that he thinks it's more subtle than just assuming that all evangelicals or the vast majority voted for Trump. He says the serious evangelicals of the type that he was trained in and worked around did not vote for Trump. There was another question that was put to him that there still seems to be a sizable number of white evangelicals who support Trump. And they asked Mr. Yancey how would he explain that. He said that the division in this country is between the coast, he says, and the South and the heartland. He says it was really obvious back in 2016. He says the media is coming from the coast and progressive just assume that when something like gay marriage happens, well, we're all on board. Well, the people in rural Tennessee think, oh, that's not right. And then other people are very strong on the abortion issue. And then people get angry and say, we can't have people in schools teaching my 6-year-old to decide whether to be a boy or girl. So Mr. Yancey thinks that Trump just tapped into that sense that something's wrong. We're going in the wrong direction. Something is wrong with this country. He seems to doubt that anything would cause Trump's hardcore supporters to abandon him. He says that he remembers back in 2016, and I remember this as well, but Donald Trump said I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. He made that remark before a cheering audience at Dordt University in Iowa, a Christian college. Yancey says that some polls indicate that the January 6 hearings have nibbled away at Donald Trump's popularity, but the problem is that hardcore supporters on both sides listen to separate sources of news and tend to hear what confirms their own biases. And more moderate Republicans can't get much traction without Trump's support base. Now, what does that say? What does that say to us? That, oh my gosh, we can't be true to self. That, we have to seek people who we don't agree with to get them to vote for us. What kind of nonsense is that? What kind of nonsense is that? Wow. So I would encourage you to check out Philip Yancey. Again, his books, What's So Amazing About Grace and Where Is God When It Hurts, and his memoir, Where the Light Fell. This is a really fascinating person with, this great experience, from his junior year in high school and, how he attended this racist rally at church. How do we change things? How do we turn things around? How do we get people to, especially those that believe in a God and that are religious people, how do we get them to turn away from the politics that have divided us in this nation? And how do we get them to turn away from the racism that still divides us in this country? How do we do that? That's a question for you. I want you to think about that. Think about it with Jaden Miller is the name of my podcast. I want to say that you guys are really great and I appreciate the support that you continue to give me. I have been doing this podcast for now a year and I am amazed at the number of people that have tuned in and shared and all of that. So as I get ready to close, please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. Please feel free to drop me a line, a comment. I'll be happy to respond to you. Also, please check out my website at www.jadenmiller.com. You can find me on your favorite podcast platform. I've mentioned them. You know them. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Castbox, iHeartRadio, Audrey, Podvine, and Amazon Podcasts. Thank you guys for joining me on this beautiful Sunday in September. Think about it with Jaden Miller. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Think About It with Jaden Miller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and like and follow on your favorite podcast platform.